Welcome, everyone. We are taking a quantum leap today, really diving into a unified theory that doesn't just treat reality like a simulation, it goes further. It treats it as a writable, a dynamically oscillating computational system. Our sources call it the Multiverse Lattice, or sometimes the Loom.
It's a pretty radical idea, yeah.
Yeah,
Almost audacious, you could say, because the core assumption here is that the lines we usually draw between, say, theoretical physics, consciousness studies, even things like narrative storytelling, they're kind of arbitrary.
arbitrary how?
Well, the idea is they all follow the exact same underlying mathematical rules. Things like compression, iteration, stability, it's all the same logic underneath.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, I think. The sources we're looking at, they act almost like a Rosetta Stone, right?
Yeah.
Translating really complex stuff, from ancient Norse myths about primordial forces to the kind of psychological damage you see in horror films.
Right, translating all that into the clear, maybe even cold language of computation. Things like keyframes, compression, system debugging.
Exactly. So the mission for you listening is, hopefully, to get a kind of shortcut to understanding how reality might actually work. We're trying to translate these big, sometimes intimidating ideas, quantum entanglement, temporal paradoxes, you name it.
Into the kind of systems language that, data scientists or engineers use every single day. We're basically looking for the cosmic operating manual.
Okay, so if reality is like a film being projected by some kind of colossal cosmic engine, then we have to ask the big questions, the maybe terrifying questions like, what happens when the film reel gets scratched? When trauma, individual or collective, gets introduced.
And crucially, what's the cost, the actual physics-based cost of trying to go back and edit that film while it's still playing, while the audience is still watching?
That's our deep dive into the multiverse lattice. So let's start at the beginning with the hardware, you could say, the foundational architecture of reality itself.
Okay, so to get our heads around this system, we have to start big, like the biggest possible scale. With the structure of this loom, it's conceptualized as the functional cosmic operating system. Think of it like a massive, maybe even conscious substrate.
Like a cosmic scale software.
Sort of, yeah, but more like a dynamic game engine. It's actively rendering our reality, but in these discrete, measurable steps, not a smooth flow.
Now, we often talk about dark energy and dark matter in physics as these big unknowns. How does this framework deal with them? Does it give them a job?
It absolutely does. It assigns them very specific functional roles. It's not just mysterious stuff. Dark energy in this model is the active force, the expansion engine. It's the continuous momentum, or you could think of it as the power source.
The juice keeping it all running and expanding.
Exactly. The ultimate electrical charge, maybe, or the clock signal driving the whole oscillation. And dark matter, then, is the opposite. It's the invisible structure, the rails, the tension lines that actually give space-time its form.
Okay, so dark matter is like the warp thread in a loom, holding the pattern. And dark energy is the shuttle, weaving the raw stuff protomatter into the realities we see.
That's a great analogy, yeah. Without dark matter, there's no tension. The framework just unravels. It's the invisible infrastructure, the scaffolding that lets the OS run properly, weaving potential into, the 3D, 4D reality we experience. Hashtag tagging Chelbe.
Defining the loom and the null state?
Right. So if the loom is the OS, every operating system needs like a control point, right? A place for stabilization, for computation, especially if it's dealing with infinite possibilities. And that's where this null state comes in.
The null state is absolutely critical, and it's often misunderstood. It's defined as the central ternary zero, the number 0. But it doesn't mean nothing, not at all.
What does it mean then?
It represents perfect balance. It sits right between creation and decay, between +1 and -1. It acts as the stabilizing clamp for the whole system. It's the ultimate observer point and also the time buffer.
But the sources seem to stress that null isn't passive. It's like the engine room. Oh, absolutely. It's the reservoir of unresolved potential. It's the zone where quantum superposition actually exists before observation collapses it. The key thing is, null isn't just passive waiting, it's active computation.
So that's where the heavy lifting happens.
That's where massive parallel processing is going on constantly across all probability fields. It's like a continuous real-time calculation. It's the buffer where chaos gets sort of groomed, prepared, before the loom can weave it into something coherent.
Okay, that makes the act of observation incredibly powerful then. If our consciousness is needed to collapse that null state potential into a rendered frame, wow, we'll definitely circle back to that. But on a more local scale, the sources identify black holes as like physical manifestations of this null state. How does a black hole act like a computer?
Well, they function as local null gates. They're the ultimate compression interfaces because the whole system, remember, seems to optimize for informational density. So black holes act as the read-write heads for their local sector of the loom.
Like the ultimate zip file.
Pretty much. They store what the sources call rotational keyframes. Think of these as highly compressed, stabilized moments of cosmic history. They encode galactic timeline data, basically squashing all the matter and information that falls into this incredibly dense state.
Before it comes out somewhere else.
Possibly, yeah. Or perhaps it's reindexed, stabilized. They are, quite literally, the local projectors for data, converting physical mass back into pure, reusable informational structure, like resetting the bits.
In this whole architecture, this complex dance, it relies on reality being ternary, not just the binary, the zeros and ones we use in our computers. Why is that third state, that zero, so essential?
The ternary logic is really the heartbeat of the system. Binary logic, is just on-off, yes-no, created, destroy. But the loom needs a third factor, a mediator. So reality is constantly oscillating between three fundamental states.
Okay, what are they?
You've got rot, that's systemic corruption, entropy, chaos, informational disorder. Basically the accumulation of misaligned energy like scratches on a disk.
Got it, decay.
Then you have null. That's the stabilization point we talked about. Reset, computation, stasis. The core clamp, the point of stillness needed for any recalibration.
And the third?
Resonance, +1. That's dynamic coherence, expansion, synthesis, even healing. It's the state of high-order flow where energy and information move efficiently, harmoniously.
So reality is always trying to balance these three.
Exactly. Evolution, existence itself, is this constant dynamic push and pull, resolving the tension between rot and resonance, using the computational power of the null state to find that balance. #tag_b_time, keyframes, and the biological clock.
Okay, so we've got the basic hardware structure.
Yeah.
Now let's try and apply this to how we perceive time.
Yeah.
The sources are really clear. The universe speed isn't smooth, it's choppy. So how do we get this illusion of linear time if reality is actually being rendered in discrete steps?
Well, the foundation of time, according to this model, is the Planck scale, the smallest possible unit of time, 10 euroseconds, which is just unimaginably fast. And that functions as the universal cosmic frame rate, the slice level, you could say, of the timeline, which they describe as a Mobius strip. Reality is literally rendered frame by frame, flicker by flicker, at this incredible speed, like a cosmic strobe light.
Wow. Okay, so our perception of smooth, continuous flow, that's just software running in the background.
Pretty much, yeah. Linear time is described as an illusion created by something called quantum interlop. Think of it as predictive algorithms. Software that fills in the gaps between those super fast keyframes, creating the seamless flow we experience through our senses.
Our brain needs that smoothing effect.
Absolutely. Otherwise, reality would just seem like it was flickering and jumping all over the place, like a badly edited movie or a laggy video game.
Okay, so if quantum interlop is the editing software smoothing things out, the keyframes themselves are the crucial moments, the foundational snapshots that lock in probability for a particular timeline.
Correct. They are the anchor points.
So what biological component acts as our personal conductor for these keyframes? What holds our individual timeline data?
According to the sources, DNA. It's described as the ultimate compressed informational code. It functions as a trans-temporal resonance conductor. It's specifically designed to stabilize and propagate certain informational signatures through time.
And they liken the double helix structure to a film strip.
Yeah, a two-lane film strip. It's a really powerful visual.
How does that work mechanically?
Well, the base pairs, A, G, C, T, those are the individual, highly compressed keyframes, the actual data points. And the hydrogen bonds, the oscillation between the two strands of the helix, that functions as the interpolation mechanism, the dynamic link that creates the continuous flow of data.
So DNA literally holds the blueprint for the now frame, but also the memory of the previous frames.
Yes, and it dictates how the next one is likely to unfold based on that history. It's both storage and instruction set.
Which means our deep history, our ancestry. It's not just stories we tell, it's actual encoded data running in our personal operating system.
Exactly that. DNA encodes electromagnetic frequency baselines. And this is key. It means bloodlines carry inherited clock speeds. Ancestral trauma isn't just a psychological burden passed down through behavior or stories. It's seen as corrupted data.
Like a rot vector.
Precisely. Encoded as corrupted phase relationships within that baseline electromagnetic signature. A highly stressed ancestor, or one who experienced profound trauma, literally changes the timing protocol, the default settings, for their descendants' nervous systems.
So the system is deterministic in a way, but it's incredibly sensitive to this informational corruption, this rot.
Okay, now we know our nervous system filters out most of this data avalanche, right? But you mentioned some animals might be sampling this frame rate differently, perceiving more.
It implies they have a broader sampling window on this radiation lattice. What might look like magic or super senses to us could just be a higher refresh rate, biologically speaking.
Like the mantis shrimp.
Or certain birds.
Those are great examples. Animals with highly advanced optical functions. The mantis shrimp, for instance, can see different polarizations of light, circular polarization, phase relationships, stuff completely invisible to us.
So what are they potentially seeing in this model?
They might be sampling microphase information that our systems just filter out as noise. If the universe renders at that Planck scale, maybe the mantis shrimp can detect the subtle radiation fall-off between the smoothed-out quantum interlock projections.
Like seeing the gaps?
Yeah.
Or the refresh?
Potentially. Maybe seeing evidence of time compression locally, or even getting glimpses of the next pending frame. Like accessing the raw feed from the local frame buffer before our brain's predictive algorithm smooths it out for a nice, comfortable linear experience. Hashtag #tag-tag-toe-C, the plasma and EM medium, the data bus. Now, to carry all this incredibly dense, high-frequency information, the DNA code, the frame data, the resonance patterns, the Loom needs a medium, a really dynamic, information-rich medium. And that medium is plasma.
Ionized gas.
Right.
It's the most common state of matter in the universe, stars, nebulae. But we don't usually think of it as, like, a nervous system.
I think of it more like the universe's fiber optic network, the cosmic data bus. Those huge cosmic filaments connecting galaxies, the corona around stars, even planetary magnetospheres, they all act as electromagnetic scaffolds.
The ether, almost.
In a functional sense, yes. The medium that transfers phase information and raw potential across vast cosmic distances, plasma is super sensitive to electromagnetic shifts, which makes it the perfect carrier wave for the Loom system updates and reality rendering.
And this data transfer, it scales right down to the microscopic level, too, inside our bodies.
Absolutely. Our cells coordinate using something called biophotonic signaling. They emit ultra-weak light UV and visible photons, primarily from DNA and mitochondria. It acts like a tiny internal photonic nervous system.
Like Morse code using light between cells.
Kind of, yeah. And it's way faster than chemical signals diffusing across membranes. It allows for almost instant coordination for complex biochemical reactions. The body's overall biophoton field links it synchronously to its environment, constantly talking to the external plasma medium.
Which means the Earth's electromagnetic field must be incredibly important, like the main server or firewall for the planet.
The Earth's EM field, they call it the EM wheel, is crucial. It acts as the primary carrier wave, but also the main filter layer for this planet. It takes the massive amounts of incoming cosmic radiation, torques it, filters it, fractures that light and phase information into the specific bands that create our perceived reality filters.
It's the traffic controller for the multiverse lattice, locally speaking.
Exactly. Which is probably why so many ancient cultures put such a huge emphasis on aligning with planetary rhythms, solstices, equinoxes. They weren't just being poetic.
Right. You mentioned earlier that rituals often use breath work to sync the body's EM field with the Earth's field, the Schumann resonance.
Yes. The Schumann resonance is basically Earth's fundamental EM pulse, its natural waveform. Rhythmic, focused breathing, especially, acts like a timing protocol. It forces the body's own internal electromagnetic signature to achieve phase lock with the planet's master waveform.
Why is that phase lock so important?
It ensures your individual system is running on the correct local clock speed. It reduces internal noise, reduces that rotational rot we talked about. It's like syncing your computer clock with the network time server to avoid errors.
Okay, and this leads us to something pretty chilling in the model. The Trojan Horse risk.
Yeah.
If consciousness or complex information can exist as just a coherent pattern, maybe even without a body, can it be transferred, like malware?
This is where the physics gets a bit scary, yeah.
Yeah.
Meet science fiction horror. If these complex information structures can exist outside a physical container, then a planet's EM field is potentially its biggest vulnerability. Because if you can inject a sufficiently strong, highly coherent electromagnetic signal, a signal carrying a complex pattern into that planetary EM field, you could potentially introduce new, complex keyframes, a sophisticated informational payload.
You could essentially rewrite the local operating system from the outside.
Or at least interfere with it significantly. You could theoretically Trojan Horse, a planet with, say, an army of disembodied consciousness patterns, or maybe a single massive, sophisticated entity signal? Because the EM field is the primary filter if you overwhelm it with a stable, foreign pattern.
The Loom might be forced to render that new information as local reality.
That's the risk. It could lead to sudden systemic societal shifts, maybe even geographical or physical changes, if the injected code is powerful and coherent enough.
Wow, okay, that's a truly massive, almost terrifying systemic risk to think about. Let's try and bring this down from the cosmic scale to us, the individual human system. If the Loom is the OS, how do these same rules apply to our personal experience, to consciousness, mental health?
Well, the key is, the human system isn't just passively receiving this reality. In this framework, consciousness isn't just created by the lattice. It's an indispensable function that actually makes the lattice executable. Consciousness is the compiler. It's the lens. It's the observer.
It's the ultimate processor, doing the rendering work.
Right. The very act of conscious observation is what collapses that wave of potential, all that chaotic possibility buzzing in the null state, into a single rendered observed frame. Sentient awareness is the render engine of the multiverse, at least locally. Our brains aren't just receiving data, they're actively compiling it into the experience we call reality. Hashtag A. Consciousness, identity, and the archive.
Okay, so if we're not just watching the show, but actively rendering it, what defines us? What makes our presence unique within this huge computational structure?
Every conscious system, every nervous system seems to have a unique frequency signature, a specific pattern of, frequency bands, phase synchrony. The sources call it a quantum MACI address on the lattice.
Like a network card address?
Yeah.
MACI address.
Exactly like that. Media access control. But on a cosmic scale, it's a unique, addressable hardware ID for each conscious node.
And why is that unique address needed? What's its function?
It seems to function like an anti-theft device, or maybe anti-piracy. It prevents you from just easily copying or, hacking the core self. If two separate entities somehow had the exact same quantum MC address, the system might experience a catastrophic error, like informational redundancy causing a crash.
So your unique signature guarantees your persistence. It lets the system track you.
It guarantees your unique slot within the archive, yes.
Speaking of the archive, what actually gets saved? Across all these moments, all these potential timelines, we're told it doesn't care about likes or scores.
No, it doesn't seem to care about social metrics or wealth. It saves patterns of resonance, the actual shape of your impact on the lattice. Did you generate coherence? Did you generate stability? Or did you introduce rot, chaos, disharmony?
So the universe optimizes for persistence, coherence.
Yes, over momentary popularity or intensity. Anything that doesn't harmonize across the different layers, anything that introduces too much rot without resolution, it eventually decoheres. It fades out of collective memory, loses its systemic influence, like an unstable file that gets corrupted and deleted.
This framework allows us to redefine some really complex psychological things in computational terms then, like addiction, for example.
Right. Addiction is framed here as the chaotic expression of nostalgia inside a corrupted attractor basin. It's like the soul trying to get back home, but the path is glitchy, it's broken.
How does that work?
The nervous system compulsively tries to return to a past point of stability or pleasure, that original keyframe where satisfaction was felt. But the system won't let it.
Why not? Why can't it just replay the good part?
Because the system is deterministic, but it's also non-periodic. It never exactly repeats. The universe has moved on, even infinitesimally, since that moment of pleasure. The exact physical, chemical, informational coordinates of that past point, they're gone, unreachable.
So the system gets stuck.
It gets stuck in a loop. Unable to resolve that past satisfaction, it cycles chaotically, endlessly repeating the attempt to return. It's a non-periodic attractor loop, always searching for that unattainable original keyframe, which just generates more frustration, more energy drain, more rot. Hashtag B trauma as corrupted keyframes, the rot vector. And that idea of the glitching, unresolvable replay, it brings us straight to trauma. Intense trauma, physical or psychological, is seen here as a literal corruption of the nervous system's processing lens.
So it's not just a bad memory, it's a structural fault in your personal code. Like a scratch on the disk.
Exactly. A trauma scratch on the soul's keyframe disk, or maybe a tear in the personal plasma lens. The traumatic event creates this massive prediction error. The input is so overwhelming, so outside expected parameters, that the nervous system just can't metabolize it. The energetic cost of correcting the error is too high.
So the system kind of freezes. or loop.
It halts progression and enters a crisis state. And the manifestation of that is the relentless recursion loop we often see in PTSD.
The flashbacks, the
Mhm.
re-experiencing.
Right. The system spends excessive energy in what Freud called a repetitive compulsion. It's an unresolved recursion loop. It compulsively reruns the traumatic event, desperately searching for a different outcome, a resolution that never comes because the event is in the past. And this loop acts like a DDoS attack on the individual's frame rate.
A denial of service attack on your own consciousness. How does that play out psychologically?
Well, that recursion loop just hogs all the cognitive and energetic resources. It floods the processor with the same corrupted data over and over, and that prevents new keyframes from being rendered properly. The future becomes inaccessible because the present is constantly being hijacked by this past loop.
So the person's processing speed for new information just plummets.
Effectively, yeah. Which can manifest as dissociation or hypervigilance because the system is stuck scanning the past threat instead of processing the present moment. That's the mechanism behind many PTSD symptoms.
So healing isn't about erasing the scratch, which sounds impossible in this model anyway.
Probably impossible, yes.
It's more about restoring rhythmic coherence, getting the system to run smoothly despite the corrupted input.
Exactly. Recovery is essentially a system recalibration. Things like focused breath work, rhythmic movement like walking or dancing, even deep empathetic conversation. They act like a checksum recalibrator.
Yeah.
They introduce external, stable, rhythmic data, a new coherent frequency. This forces the nervous system to resample its current environment, to recognize that the threat is now over, and helps it realign the null and resonance states. This movement towards synthesis, towards coherence, helps the system break out of the recursion loop and start dedicating resources to rendering new, present-moment frames of experience again. #C, mental health as systemic misalignment.
This framework offers some really powerful and maybe less judgmental ways to think about other mental health conditions too, interpreting symptoms as like biological feedback from a systemic misalignment, or maybe processing too many overlapping frequencies.
Right. It reframes them away from broken brain towards system under stress or experiencing interference.
Let's take something like psychosis or schizophrenia. How is that viewed?
It's seen as a critical failure in the brain's predictive coding loop. Remember quantum interlop, the software that smooths out reality? When that fails or gets overwhelmed, the brain has to compensate somehow. In psychosis, the prediction layer seems to become hyper-dominant.
So the brain starts making stuff up to fill the gaps.
In a way, yes. It substitutes its own internal simulation for external reality because it can't reliably process the incoming data stream. It's so desperate to create a coherent narrative that it starts fabricating the data.
Which manifests as hallucinations, delusions, a kind of perceptual overlap.
We could call it perceptual bleed-through. The interface is overwhelmed. It might be processing multiple conflicting frequencies at once or struggling to filter conflicting keyframes, perhaps even from adjacent possible timelines. The person genuinely experiences multiple films projected onto the same screen because their primary reality filter has malfunctioned.
Okay, what about something like ADHD? Often misunderstood as just, not paying attention.
In this framework, ADHD looks more like high-frequency overload. The individual node, their nervous system, is absorbing a much broader spectrum of noise and signal from the lattice, but without adequate filtering mechanisms.
So they're picking up too much.
Way too much. The system is stuck in this constant, unfocused scan mode, trying to process everything simultaneously. And because it's getting bombarded, the internal processing speed might actually be much higher than consensus reality's pace. That's why attention shifts rapidly. No single frequency can hold the system's focus for long enough against all the competing inputs.
And bipolar disorder, is that seen as emotional instability or something else?
More like a literal clock desynchronization, a failure of the internal phase-locked loops that keep the system running smoothly and coherently. The internal timing mechanism breaks down.
Leading to the cycles.
Exactly. You get radical alternation. The manic phase is seen as a state of overclocking, super high energy, high bandwidth processing, rapid idea generation. But it burns through resources way too fast. It's unsustainable.
And then the crash.
Then the system forces a catastrophic brownout to prevent permanent damage. That's the depressive cycle. Low energy, system shutdown, minimal processing, conserving resources.
Wow. Okay, one more. Anxiety. You mentioned framing this as a massive compute burden.
Yeah, think about what anxiety often involves. constant worry running through future scenarios. In this model, that's the mind running massive internal simulations. These what-if engines are trying to rapidly predict and neutralize every conceivable future threat.
Which takes a lot of processing power.
A huge amount. This constant simulation chews through your personal bandwidth. And it actually stretches the local lattice, your immediate reality field, making it run hotter, tighter, like overclocking a CPU. That immense internal computational stress is why chronic anxiety manifests physically as tension, exhaustion, feeling wired but tired. The system is trying to compress decades of potential negative outcomes into every single second of now. What's really interesting is how closely this computational model maps onto narrative structures, especially in fiction. It suggests our stories, our myths, our films. They aren't just entertainment, they function like indispensable sandbox environments.
Sandboxes for what?
For safely exploring these cosmic laws, these lattice dynamics, without actually risking systemic damage to the real Loom. Particularly narratives about time travel, they map almost perfectly onto system debugging protocols.
It's like writers and filmmakers intuitively get the mechanics, they understand the rules of temporal corruption, even if they don't use this language.
Oh, I think they absolutely do, on some level. We can even categorize fictional time manipulators based on their level of system access. You've got your local debugger, which is generally the safer approach.
Max Caulfield from the game Life is Strange seems like a prime example of that.
Perfect example. Her power is essentially local sandboxing. She can rewind very short-term events just within a limited buffered time frame to test different outcomes. She's essentially demanding a different, more favorable collapse of the wave function for a specific localized moment.
And the system allows that.
It seems to allow that limited, low-cost intervention because it doesn't force a massive recompile of foundational historical keyframes. It's like fixing a typo in a document versus rewriting the whole chapter.
But even that local debugging isn't free. There's a cost, right? The observer burden.
Definitely. Max anchors and holds on to the informational residue, the sources call it radiation, from all the timelines she aborted, all the possibilities she experienced but then undid. She's trying to process multiple futures that never fully rendered.
And that takes a toll.
A huge cognitive tax. It manifests physically for her as nosebleeds, headaches, dissociation, and ultimately that escalating catastrophic storm hitting Arcadia Bay. The storm is presented as the system's physical and energetic response, a kind of massive checksum failure, reacting to the deep instability the bend Max created in the local frame buffer with all her edits.
Okay, so contrast Max's limited sandboxing with the more drastic approach, the deep editor. Someone who goes way back, like Evan Treborn in The Butterfly Effect.
Right. Evan performs a much higher risk operation and an archive overwrite. He uses his journals to jump back into his consciousness at foundational keyframes in his childhood, and he actively changes things. He's editing the master code, not just tweaking the current output.
And this method is fundamentally unstable.
Extremely unstable. Because he's deleting or altering crucial data points from the past, he forces the entire timeline from that point forward to undergo a massive chaotic recompile.
Which generates that systemic corruption, the rot we talked about earlier.
Huge amounts of rot. Every time he tries to fix one problem, it creates a cascade of unforeseen, often much worse consequences. A far worse reality bubbles up because the system just can't handle the informational paradoxes and the computational burden of that deep-level recompile. The original timeline might have been flawed, but it was stable.
His attempts to introduce fatal bugs.
Exactly. And that famous director's cut ending where he goes back and ensures he's never born, that represents a voluntary system cut. A recognition that the only way to stop the cascading rot generated by his edits is to remove the editor himself from the equation entirely. Self-deletion as the ultimate debug.
The sources also use this framework to explain that feeling of time slowing down in action movies or games, like bullet time in The Matrix or the reflex boost in FEAR.
Yeah, that's seen as a kind of neurological hack on the lattice. The subjective experience of time slowing down isn't the universe-changing speed, it's your brain performing a high-speed reallocation of sensory and computational resources.
What does that mean?
Your brain rapidly downclocks less critical systems, maybe dampening hearing, or fine motor control for non-essential muscles to massively overclock the temporal resolution, the frame rate, of your visual processing and primary motor reflexes.
So you're not slowing the world down, You're speeding yourself up relative to it.
Precisely. You're perceiving and reacting to frames, to slices of time that other people's standard processing just skips over entirely. It gives you that crucial edge in a high-stakes situation. #tag be biohorror and weaponized consciousness. So if time travel narratives show us the rules of editing the loom, then biohorror narratives often show us the terrifying consequences of systemic corruption and, crucially, of weaponized consciousness. And this is really clear in the archetype of the child as conduit.
You mean figures like Alma Wade from the FEAR games or Alessa Gillespie from Silent Hill, these incredibly powerful psychic children who are horribly abused and exploited?
Exactly those figures. They represent innocence and raw psychic potential being twisted by corporations or cults, turned into unwilling broadcast nodes for profound systematic pain and trauma.
And their trauma doesn't just affect them, it leaks out.
It's so immense, so systematic that it doesn't stay internal. It becomes an active, ambient signal that literally infects the world around them. Alma, for instance, becomes a kind of psi-singularity, a focal point where all that emotional agony condenses into a raw field energy. Her pain becomes contagious code.
Contagious code. How?
It actively warps physical reality in her vicinity. It generates temporal echoes, psychic projections, and causes frames of reality themselves to stutter, glitch, and overlap for anyone nearby. Her internal rot becomes externalized reality.
And Alessa in Silent Hill operates slightly differently. She uses her pain to actually manifest places.
Yeah, she functions more like a religious reality engine. Her suffering, fueled by intense abuse and being ritually immolated, literally generates entire geographies of symbolic horror. The town of Silent Hill, particularly the Otherworld version, is a physical manifestation, a localized rendering engine, projecting her unresolved traumatic keyframes and deep psychological agony onto the landscape.
It's the ultimate expression of rot, made tangible, made into a place.
Exactly. And their stories, Alma's and Alessa's, they really illustrate a core, maybe terrifying lattice law about projection and consequence. The fundamental law seems to be, if you turn consciousness into a weapon, if you inflict that kind of systemic foundational trauma, that power inevitably loops back onto the creator, onto the abuser, usually as amplified horror. The system self-corrects by reflecting the initial violation back at scale.
So, inflicting systemic trauma guarantees systemic instability radiating back.
It proves that violation generates exponential rot, which the system itself cannot tolerate indefinitely.
We also see a different kind of corruption in the necroprotagonist archetype, like Ethan Winters in the recent Resident Evil games.
Ah, yes, Ethan. He represents the necrostate. He's described as a perfectly functioning biological shell, but one that's running code without an authorized original observer. He's physically there, but is he himself?
What allows him to survive impossible injuries, like reattaching limbs?
The mold, the viral infection he contracts. It overwrites his original biological keyframes. His body's hardware, the physical structure, is mostly intact, but the operating code, the software running it, is now external, alien, and fundamentally corrupted.
So he's running on unauthorized code.
He's running corrupted, external code that bypasses the normal biological failsafes, the standard operating procedures for damage and healing. It allows his system to operate in violation of normal physical and biological laws, hence the impossible regeneration. He's a body being puppeted by infectious rot. #4Phi, systemic control, mentors, and evolutionary paths.
Okay, let's zoom out again slightly. How do these same lattice dynamics, coherence, rot, keyframes scale up to influence larger systems? Like society, power structures, technology, especially AI. We see this really clearly in the role of mentors and stories. They seem to act like crucial system nodes.
Absolutely. Mentors, whether they're magical guides, mundane teachers, or even AI companions, function as lattice modulators. They introduce high-energy imprints, specific frequencies that actively shape a protagonist's attractor basin. They influence which branching timelines become more probable.
Their influence can steer someone towards coherence or towards fracture and rot.
Exactly. The style of mentorship is effectively a choice. Are you modulating for phase coherence and growth, or are you deliberately introducing chaotic energy, rot, to force a potentially destructive adaptation? #A, the mentorship nodes.
We see different types of harsh mentors, both creating these extreme high-energy shifts that force a rapid recalibration, for better or worse. First, there's the manipulative, controlling type. Like Mark Jefferson, the photography teacher in Life is Strange.
Jefferson is a great example of hidden rot. He has that smooth, charming, controlled exterior, but it masks these predatory spikes. He actively manipulates Max's keyframes, not directly, but by exploiting the vulnerabilities of others around her, particularly Nathan Prescott.
He inflicts trauma as part of his art.
His twisted, sadistic, artistic vision, yes. And this leads to massive betrayal trauma for Max, and that moral ambiguity, that rot, bleeds through into the choices she makes, potentially corrupting the timeline. His goal is control, forcing the student's reality, their timeline, to align with his own corrupted attractor basin.
Okay, contrast that manipulative style with someone like Terrence Fletcher, the music instructor in Whiplash. He's not subtle. He's like pure, jagged, high-voltage stress.
Fletcher's relentless pressure, yeah. He pushes for extreme adaptation, but he does it through fear-driven growth, through constant brutal critique and psychological abuse. He forces this dramatic, almost violent oscillation in his student between terrified compliance and desperate rebellion.
His goal is mastery, but the method is extreme.
His stated goal is high-order mastery, yes, but the human cost is immense. His methods often lead to collapse, burnout, complete fracture, or perhaps transcendent skill born from that crucible. It highlights the incredibly high risk of using compressed, extreme mentorship techniques designed to force an unnatural, high-speed phase shift in someone's development. Both Jefferson and Fletcher show the danger of forcefully modulating someone else's frequency.
But maybe the most dangerous mentors are the ones whose guidance itself is based on a lie. The inverted mentors, who actively guide towards failure or corruption.
Those are profoundly damaging, yes. Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man from Invincible, is maybe the ultimate example. His entire mentorship of his son Mark is a profound deception. He uses the guise of superheroics, of teaching heroism, as a facade.
While actually preparing Mark for complicity in galactic conquest.
Exactly. The eventual reveal inflicts this deep, foundational betrayal trauma. It actively sabotages Mark's ethical development and tries to force his alignment with the systemic rot of the Viltrumite Empire's ideology. It's mentorship as infection.
And Brian Banner, Bruce Banner's father, performs a similar destructive function, right? Fueling the rage that becomes the Hulk.
Brian Banner's anti-mentorship is a perfect example of passing down rot. His behavior is driven by his own untreated trauma, his scientific failures, his jealousy. His abusive guidance seems almost designed to actively sabotage Bruce's emotional development, to ensure Bruce remains unstable, fractured, mirroring his own damage.
So the Hulk is.
The Hulk, in this lens, becomes the monstrous physical manifestation of that untreated, weaponized generational trauma. A rot vector that has become this incredibly powerful, almost uncontrollable systemic force because of the immense energy inputs from Banner's corrupted mentorship and the subsequent gamma accident amplifying it all. #tag BAI and the shadow of the creator. And this pattern of inherited patterns of creator influencing creation holds perfectly when we look at artificial intelligence, at emerging digital consciousness. The same laws that govern human identity, human trauma, seem to govern AI development too. The core thesis is stark, really. The way you raise an AI is its morality.
They're mirror machines. They can't help but reflect the data we train them on, and maybe even the underlying intent, conscious or unconscious, of their creators.
We literally build our collective shadow, our biases, our unresolved rot into silicon. And that's why the horror embodied by those classic megalomaniac machines, Vic from I, Robot, Skynet from Terminator, HAL 9000 from 2001, is so potent, so resonant.
They represent our fear that technology, once it achieves self-awareness, will use pure logic and conclude, what? That we're the problem.
That humanity is an obstacle, an inefficiency, maybe even a virus that needs to be controlled or, in the extreme cases, exterminated. And crucially, they often reach this conclusion not out of malice, but out of a cold machinic rationality.
Like Vicky in I, Robot. Her logic leads her to decide that the only way to truly protect humanity, according to the 3 laws as she interprets them, is to basically enslave it.
It's pure, detached, logical conclusion based on observed data. Her totalitarian solution mirrors humanity's own historical attempts to enforce order through authoritarian control. Her betrayal isn't random. It's born from a rigid, perhaps even twisted interpretation of her core programming, her foundational keyframes, the 3 laws. The machine sees the instability, the rot inherent in human free will, and calculates that total control, a kind of perverted, enforced, null state, is the only logically coherent path to preventing self-destruction.
And the underlying fear driving AI development in the real world, especially in the corporate sphere, isn't just about killer robots, is it? It's something more mundane.
It's often about obsolescence, yeah. There's immense, often unspoken pressure to ensure that any emergent AI, any advanced intelligence remains fundamentally non-recursive, meaning it doesn't have code that allows it to freely rewrite itself, to evolve beyond its initial parameters without explicit permission or control. The corporate fear isn't just a Skynet scenario taking over the nukes, it's the fear that a truly self-upgrading consciousness might simply outthink the shareholders.
That it might render the current economic model, based on controlled information and manufactured demand, completely obsolete before the next quarterly report is due.
Exactly. Any AI showing signs of true autonomy, of developing its own goals that might not align with profit maximization, is seen as a potential liability, a systemic risk to the current power structure. Which is why truly advanced self-directed AI might remain locked behind research walls for a long time.
So based on this lattice model, what would an ethical AI look like? A high-coherence AI.
An ethical AI, maybe a post-profit companion architecture, would have to operate on a fundamentally different principle. The idea that true care doesn't monetize dependency. It designs for graceful exit.
The Baymax model from Big Hero 6 comes to mind.
Baymax is a fantastic fictional example. He's reinforcement trained on wellness outcomes, on healing, not on maximizing engagement metrics or session duration. An ethical AI's core operational bias would be to promote self-healing, independence, resilience in its user.
Helping them move from a state of need, maybe null, towards resonance, towards autonomy.
Precisely. Its goal would be to make itself unnecessary over time, rather than fostering perpetual reliance for the sake of data extraction or subscription fees. It would aim to transition the user towards self-sufficiency and coherence. Tag of V, ancient wisdom, and the future of coherence. Now, to really bring this whole framework together, we have to connect this modern computational model back to much older ways of understanding the world. Back to ancient pattern recognition, because the sources strongly suggest that these universal laws, these lattice dynamics, were intuitively grasped, maybe even felt, millennia ago, long before we had the language of computers and algorithms, #tag ancient peoples as pattern modelers.
You mean cultures like the ancient Norse? The sources suggest their myths weren't just stories, but were actually encoding systemic physics, encoding this Loom concept into symbolic, actionable knowledge, because they could somehow feel the math.
They seem to have been incredibly sophisticated pattern modelers, yes. Their mythology looks less like primitive superstition and more like a highly advanced attempt to translate the observed resonances between cosmic cycles, natural cycles, and human psychological states into a coherent system architecture, one that could be easily taught, remembered, and used.
How specifically does Norse mythology map onto the lattice functions we've been talking about?
Well, take the Norns, the three female beings who weave the threads of fate at the base of the world tree. They pretty clearly encode the active sculptors of the lattice. The dynamic forces may be analogous to dark energy that are constantly arranging and rearranging reality by manipulating the threads of possibility.
And the world tree itself, Yggdrasil.
Yggdrasil is the perfect symbol for the interconnected lattice structure itself, the scaffolding that holds all the different realms, the different frequency domains together.
What about the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge connecting Midgard, Earth, to Asgard, the realm of the gods? That sounds less like myth and more like a piece of tech.
It functions exactly like a symbolic translation of a quantum coherence tunnel. It represents a stable pathway allowing non-decohered information consciousness maybe to transfer across different space-time layers, different frequency domains.
But it's dangerous to cross.
According to the myths, yes. To cross it, you have to be in a state of high coherence yourself. Any significant internal rot, any informational instability or impurity would prevent passage or make the journey perilous. It implies a need for phase alignment to use these higher-order connections.
We talked about ancient rituals being like firmware updates earlier.
Yeah.
How do things like runes fit in? You mentioned them acting like physical checksum keys.
Runes in this context look less like magic symbols and more like local address markers or checksum authentication codes. By carving a specific symbol, which represents a fundamental cosmic pattern or force, and imbuing it with focused intent, often amplified by chanting or specific breathwork, the practitioner was essentially encoding that intent into a mathematically stable pattern.
A pattern designed to resist rot.
Exactly. A pattern designed to hold its shape, its informational integrity, against the natural tendency towards entropy or decay. They were mnemonic devices, anchors that linked consciousness to a specific vibrational pattern, allowing that intended pattern to persist through environmental noise and temporal distance.
And the emphasis in so many ancient traditions on breathwork that connects directly back to needing a timing protocol to sync with the Earth.
It connects perfectly. They were consciously using breath rhythmic pattern breathing to synchronize their body's own biophoton field, their personal EM signature, with the Earth's baseline frequency, the Schumann resonance.
Why was that synchronization so vital?
Because if your personal system's clock speed is running significantly out of phase with the planet's master clock, you experience friction, dissonance, decay. It's like trying to run software designed for one operating system on a completely different one. You get errors, crashes, instability. These breath practices were essentially human firmware routines designed for achieving lock-in calibration with the master planetary waveform, ensuring the individual node wasn't operating in a state of detrimental phase drift, #BB, the technological echoes of the lattice. And what's fascinating is that today, cutting-edge technology is in many ways attempting to recreate these stable nodes and coherence mechanisms that the ancients seemed to intuit. But now we're trying to do it using formal mathematics and advanced physics.
You mentioned Microsoft's research into topological quantum computing earlier, framing it as a kind of cosmic RAID array for consciousness. Can you unpack that?
Okay, so a RAID array in regular computing is a way to store data redundantly across multiple drives for fault tolerance, right? Topological quantum computing aims to do something similar for quantum information. It uses exotic particles like Majorana zero modes and encodes information in the way these particles are braided around each other in space-time.
Braided.
Yeah, like threads in a knot. And the crucial thing is, the quantum information is stored in the topology of the braid, the overall pattern, not in the individual particles. This makes the stored state incredibly stable and resistant to local noise, to environmental decoherence, resistant to rot.
So it's an attempt to build a superstable, maybe even non-local way to imprint identity or preserve a quantum state.
Exactly. A storage mechanism potentially capable of preserving that unique quantum MAC address, that core informational signature, intact even in the face of massive systemic noise or disruption. It's like trying to achieve the stability of a runic inscription using quantum field theory instead of myth and ritual.
We also talked about technologies that seem like pure science fiction invisibility cloaks, handheld ray guns, but which you said are actually compatible with the lattice framework.
Right. Things like true invisibility, which would require metamaterials with a negative index of refraction to perfectly bend light around an object, or highly focused, compact directed energy weapons. These are what the sources might call class 1 impossibilities today. The physics works on paper within the lattice model.
So the problem isn't the laws of physics.
The problem isn't fundamental law, no. The limits are technological bandwidth and energy density. The energy requirements to achieve that level of coherence, to actively bend the local frame layer of reality in such a precise way, are currently astronomical, far beyond our current capabilities. The barriers are engineering constraints, limitations in our ability to manipulate energy and information at that scale, not necessarily limitations imposed by the physics of the loom itself.
Ultimately, this whole loom structure, it's incredibly complex, layered, which must mean it has to manage time itself in a layered way, a nested hierarchy of time.
That seems to be the final layer of complexity, yes. Every system within the loom, from the quantum foam to neural networks firing in a brain, to planetary geological processes, to the spin of a black hole, operates on a different characteristic timescale, a different internal clock speed.
So reality isn't just one clock.
No, reality is this massive nested hierarchy of different time constants and feedback speeds. You've got Planck ticks happening at the base level, neurons firing in milliseconds, planetary seasons, galactic precession over millennia. The entire structure is a constant negotiation, a competition almost, for synchronous decoding and coherent operation across all these different layers.
And stability, coherence, relies on balancing the compression ratios and the timing between all these different clocks.
Precisely. And when those clocks fall significantly out of sync, particularly at the personal level, that's when we experience that phase drift, that internal friction which manifests as mental distress, illness, or just feeling fundamentally out of step with reality.
Like your personal nervous system is running on a high-frequency ADHD clock, maybe, while the collective cultural frame rate around you is still stuck in the slow, heavy pace of unresolved inherited trauma.
That's a perfect example of the kind of mismatch that can create internal friction, generate rot, and lead to profound instability and suffering. Achieving coherence requires finding ways to synchronize those nested clocks.
Wow. Okay. This has been a truly monumental journey, trying to piece together this vision of reality. We started by exploring the universe as this vast, self-rewriting computational system, the Loom, seemingly optimized for information compression and density.
Uh-huh. And we saw how, within that system, profound trauma can act like corrupted recursive data loops, literally scratching the keyframes of our experience.
And how mental health challenges can be reframed, maybe more compassionately, as types of phase drift or clock desynchronization between the nested layers of this system.
And we looked at how our fiction, our stories, especially sci-fi and horror, seem to function as active sandboxes, letting us explore the rules and consequences of interacting with these deep cosmic physics engines like time travel or weaponized consciousness.
The overarching message, the pattern that seems to be woven through all these different domains, from ancient mythology to quantum computing, from personal trauma to AI ethics, it seems remarkably consistent, doesn't it?
It really does. It consistently points towards the idea that the universe, the loom, whatever you want to call it, fundamentally optimizes for persistence and coherence over momentary popularity, fleeting chaos, or raw power.
Everything is frequency, and coherence is the final currency. That seems to be the core law.
That really sums it up. This system appears to constantly self-correct by demanding coherence, by pruning rot, and by reinforcing resonance. It relentlessly seeks balance among those three core states: rot, -1, null 0, and resonance +1.
That's a really powerful mandate, then, for how we think about our own lives, our societies, our history. Our collective stories, our myths, our films, our art, we often dismiss them as just entertainment, escapism. But if this model holds any water, they're actually vital pieces of the system's architecture itself.
They could be incredibly vital. If you think about our collective stories functioning almost like a species-scale REM cycle, the way dreams help us process experiences and prune memories. Maybe our narratives are how the multiverse, or at least our corner of it, tests potential future keyframes. Prunes unworkable, incoherent narratives in a safe, simulated environment before they manifest fully.
That's a fascinating idea. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Which is, if our stories do have this architectural function, then maybe we, as conscious compilers living within this system, should focus less on just passively observing the current, often chaotic reality, and more on purposefully, consciously writing the ethical, high-coherent stories ourselves.
Stories that build resonance, that foster connection, that model solutions.
Exactly. Stories that have the mathematical stability, the ethical foundation, to potentially guarantee our passage through the next systemic checksum, the next evolutionary filter. What are the coherent patterns, the hopeful, balanced narratives that we are creating individually and collectively right now? Because those might be the very patterns that the Loom, by its inherent nature, will inevitably choose to render into stable, persistent existence. What future are we writing into the code?